a cold Christmas morning at a remote military base, where holiday lights flickered against snow-dusted barracks and soldiers joked their way through light duty. An old janitor quietly pushed a rusted shovel across the frozen courtyard. His boots crunched through the ice, his breath fogged the air, and his faded red shirt peeked out from beneath a worn winter coat. Most soldiers barely noticed him, but a few young, restless ones decided he was an easy target. They laughed at his slow pace, mocked his trembling hands, and tossed snowballs near him on accident, completely unaware that the quiet man shoveling snow alone had once survived winters far harsher than this one. They didn't know his scars came from frostbite, not age. They didn't know he once held a weapon instead of a shovel. And they certainly didn't know that the name embroidered faintly on his coat was written in history books, just not where they'd ever looked. What happened next would transform that Christmas morning into a memory the base would never forget. Because the moment a senior officer stepped outside, saw the old man, and recognized the war record hidden beneath his silence, everything changed. Keep listening, and which city are you listening from? And if you enjoy the story, please subscribe for more. The courtyard lay still beneath a heavy layer of new snow, untouched except for the path the old janitor carved alone. He worked methodically, his weathered hands steady on the wooden handle despite the bite of winter. His white beard caught flakes of snow, his steel-gray eyes focused on the ground ahead. Though bundled in cold-weather gear, his unmistakable faded red shirt showed beneath his unzipped coat, and his worn blue jeans were dusted with frost. It was Christmas, yet he worked as if the day meant nothing to him. A group of off-duty soldiers, 6 young men in their 20s, emerged from the barracks wearing Santa hats and steaming mugs of cocoa. Their laughter echoed across the courtyard, loud and carefree. The oldest among them nudged his friend and pointed with a smirk. "Look at Grandpa Frostbite over there." Another snickered. "Man, he's been shoveling since yesterday. At this rate, we'll hit New Year's before he finishes." A third soldier lifted his phone to record. "Watch this," he said, throwing a snowball that landed a foot from the old man. "Oops, Merry Christmas, old-timer." The others burst out laughing while the janitor paused, lifted his head slightly, and looked at the disturbed snow. He didn't react to the mockery. He simply continued shoveling, but his slow, methodical movements seemed to irritate them further. "Come on, old man," one soldier shouted. "Pick it up! You're clearing snow, not defusing a bomb." Another chimed in. "Hey, maybe he thinks he's still in the war. You think he even remembers where he is?" The old janitor stopped this time. He planted the shovel in the snow and straightened his back, breathing slowly. His beard rustled as he exhaled, and he turned just enough to look at them, but only briefly, with tired eyes that carried more winters than they could imagine. His silence only made them bolder. The tallest soldier stepped forward. "Come on, man, it's Christmas. Why are you working out here alone? Don't you have family?" The old janitor looked down at the snow again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone I had stayed behind." They laughed, thinking it was a joke. "Stayed behind? What, they get tired of waiting for you to shovel the driveway?" Another chimed in. "Or maybe they froze waiting for him to finish." More laughter. The old man simply picked up his shovel and resumed clearing the walkway. His quiet dignity infuriated them. They wanted a reaction. They wanted power. What they got instead was the beginning of a lesson they'd never forget. Because someone else had stepped into the courtyard, and that someone recognized the old man instantly. The soldiers' laughter died the moment a door slammed shut on the far side of the courtyard. Heavy boots crunched in the snow, slow, deliberate steps that carried authority even before the man emerged into view. A senior officer stepped out of the headquarters building, his breath forming clouds in the icy air. He was a full-bird colonel with a thick winter jacket draped over his uniform, silver eagle pins gleaming even beneath the gray Christmas sky. His eyes scanned the courtyard casually at first until they landed on the old janitor. The colonel froze mid-step. His face shifted, not with confusion, but with something deeper, recognition, the same kind a man has when seeing a ghost from another life. The soldiers noticed his sudden stillness and snapped to attention, assuming they were about to be lectured for their noise. "Sir, Merry Christmas, sir," one of them barked. The colonel didn't answer. He walked right past them, his gaze locked on the old man who had stopped shoveling and now stood quietly, leaning on the handle for support. Snow fell softly around them, the base unusually peaceful for such a tense moment. Is he coming over here?" one soldier whispered nervously. "Maybe he's gonna tell Grandpa Frostbite to take a break," another joked half-heartedly, but his voice cracked. They all felt something was wrong. The colonel approached the janitor slowly, as if approaching an altar. The old man didn't speak. He simply looked up, his steel-gray eyes tired but sharp. The colonel swallowed hard. "Sir," he said quietly, voice trembling in the icy air, "I didn't know you were stationed here." The soldiers blinked, confused. "Sir," the janitor lowered his gaze. "I'm not stationed anywhere anymore," he replied softly. "Just passing time." But the colonel shook his head, emotion tightening his jaw. "You saved my platoon," he said, "on Christmas Eve 30 years ago." The courtyard fell silent again, this time suffocatingly so. The young soldiers exchanged stunned glances. The tallest one whispered, "Saved his platoon." Another muttered, "What the hell?" The colonel took another step forward. "You were the only man who didn't leave us behind. You dragged wounded men through 6 miles of snow, 6 miles, with frostbite chewing your hands." The youngest soldier felt his stomach twist. The old janitor's hands, the same hands he mocked for trembling, had carried soldiers through hell. The colonel continued, voice growing thick. "They gave you a medal for that, a high one, but you disappeared before anyone could present it." The old man let out a small breath, watching it drift into the cold. "Medals weren't why I did it," he murmured. "Those boys needed help, that was all." The soldiers felt the ground shift beneath their feet. Everything they had mocked, his slowness, his silence, his loneliness, was now a mirror reflecting their own ignorance back at them. One of them whispered, "Holy, we had no idea." The colonel turned sharply toward them, anger striking like lightning. "You had no need to know," he snapped. "Respect isn't earned by stories or medals. It's earned because every man deserves it." The soldiers stood frozen, shame flushing their cheeks redder than the old man's faded shirt. The colonel faced the janitor again. "Permission to salute, sir." The old man immediately looked uncomfortable. "No, son, you don't need." But the colonel was already raising his hand. His salute was sharp, perfect, unwavering. Snowflakes settled on his glove as he held it there, giving the old janitor an honor he'd avoided for decades. The soldiers watched in disbelief as the man they mocked snapped a slow, quiet salute in return. No one moved, no one breathed. Christmas morning had suddenly become a battlefield of truth. The colonel lowered his salute slowly, almost reluctantly, as if breaking that moment felt like disturbing sacred ground. The old janitor dropped his hand as well, but his expression remained humble, almost embarrassed by the attention. Snow continued drifting gently between them, the courtyard now so silent the falling flakes seemed loud. The young soldiers stood frozen, their earlier bravado shattered into pieces they didn't know how to pick up. Shame clung to them heavier than their winter coats. The colonel turned toward them with an expression colder than the wind. "Do you boys have any idea who this man is?" he demanded, his voice echoing against the barracks walls. The soldiers stiffened. None dared speak. The colonel's jaw locked. "When I was your age," he said, "I served in the 32nd Winter Recon Battalion. We were deployed to one of the coldest regions on Earth. Christmas Eve became a nightmare." He took a step closer to the group, boots crunching with authority. "My platoon was pinned down, half-frozen, trapped behind a ridge during a blizzard that swallowed everything." The tallest soldier swallowed, remembering how he had joked about the janitor having no family. He wanted to shrink into the snow. The colonel continued, voice low but intense. "This man," he pointed sharply at the janitor, "crossed an entire valley alone. No backup, no radio, a pack of wolves on his trail, temperatures that flayed the skin off your fingers." The soldier's eyes widened. Even the cold seemed to tighten its grip. "He found us barely conscious," the colonel said, "some of us dying." His gaze dropped briefly, haunted by the memory, "and he dragged us one by one through waist-high snow. He built fires from frozen branches. He rationed his own food to keep us alive." The young soldiers looked at the janitor in disbelief. The old man stood silently, leaning on his shovel, his white beard catching falling snowflakes like frost. He looked nothing like the warrior described, but that was the point. The colonel's voice softened, but only slightly. "We begged him to rest. He refused. He didn't stop until every single one of us was safe." The janitor shifted uncomfortably, eyes on the ground. "I only did what any man should," he said quietly. The colonel disagreed. "You did what almost no man could." He turned back to the soldiers. "And you mocked him." The guilt hit them like an avalanche. One soldier took a step forward, voice trembling. "Sir, we didn't know." The colonel's glare sharpened. "You shouldn't have to know." Another soldier stuttered. We didn't mean to disrespect him." The colonel cut him off. "Intent doesn't erase impact." The soldiers bowed their heads. The old janitor cleared his throat softly. "Colonel," he said, "they're young. Let them learn." The colonel hesitated, then nodded. "They will." He stepped closer to the old man, lowering his voice. "Sir, the records say you refused all recognition." The old man gave a faint smile. "Recognition isn't what keeps a man warm at night." The colonel inhaled deeply. "There's something else you should know." He faced the janitor fully. "We're planning a ceremony today, small, just the men who survived that night." The janitor stared at him, stunned. "I didn't think any of you would remember." "We never forgot," the colonel said firmly. "And we want you there." The courtyard fell silent as snow continued to drift around them. For the first time that Christmas morning, the old janitor's eyes shimmered with something deeper than exhaustion, something like the return of an old heartbeat. The soldiers watched, breath held, realizing the story wasn't over. In fact, the most powerful part was still coming. The old janitor stood completely still, his gloved hands tightening ever so slightly around the wooden handle of his shovel as the colonel's words settled into the frozen air. Snow dusted his shoulders like a gentle reminder of the winters he had endured, each flake melting slowly against the warmth rising beneath his coat. For a long moment he didn't speak. The courtyard remained frozen, not by the cold, but by the weight of unspoken memories. The young soldiers shifted uneasily, unsure whether they should retreat, apologize again, or simply vanish into the snow. The colonel waited patiently, breathing deeply, his eyes locked on the man who had once carried him through a white hell. Finally, the janitor exhaled, a long, soft breath that carried decades of buried emotion. "I don't belong in ceremonies," he murmured, looking down at the snow-covered ground. "I'm just a man with a shovel now." The colonel shook his head. "No, sir, a ceremony isn't a spotlight, it's acknowledgement. You earned that long before any of us were even born." He hesitated, then said more softly, "Those of us who lived that night still talk about you, every Christmas." A flicker of surprise crossed the old man's eyes. "Every year," he whispered. "Yes," the colonel said, "and every year someone says, 'I wonder what happened to him.'" The janitor looked away, humbled and overwhelmed. "I didn't want to be found," he said. "War took enough from me. I didn't want it taking the rest." The colonel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "War took a lot from all of us, but you gave back more than anyone." Behind them, the young soldiers listened, each word hitting them like a strike of conscience. The tallest soldier finally mustered the courage to speak, his voice trembling. "Sir, may I ask something?" The janitor turned slightly, his steel-gray eyes soft but alert. "What is it, son?" The soldier swallowed hard. "Why were you out here shoveling alone on Christmas?" The old man looked down at the path he'd been clearing, the neat line of clean pavement slicing through untouched snow. "I shovel because someone has to," he said simply, "and because keeping the paths clear matters. No one slips, no one gets hurt." He paused, voice lowering. "That's all I ever tried to do, keep the path safe for others." The truth hit the soldiers like an avalanche. The colonel stepped forward again, emotion tightening his voice. "Sir, you kept the path safe for us, literally. You walked through a storm that should have taken your life. You carried men who couldn't move. You built fires when your hands were numb. You refused to leave anyone behind." The janitor's gaze drifted across the courtyard, as if seeing echoes of fallen comrades in the swirling snow. "I remember their faces," he whispered. "Every Christmas I remember." The colonel nodded solemnly. "Then come remember them with us today. You don't have to shovel alone, not anymore." The young soldiers felt their throats tighten. For the first time, they weren't looking at a janitor. They were looking at a man carved from resilience, pain, loyalty, and sacrifice. The janitor's voice softened as he looked back at the colonel. "Are you sure they want me there?" The colonel almost laughed, but emotion choked the sound. "Sir, they want nothing more." Snowflakes drifted lazily between them as the old man slowly released his grip on the shovel. His hands trembled, not from the cold, but from a sense of belonging he thought he'd lost decades ago. And just as he took the first hesitant step toward the colonel, the soldiers behind them straightened, sensing they were about to witness something sacred. The Christmas ceremony was waiting, but the real transformation of hearts, of respect, of truth was unfolding right here in the snow. The colonel led the old janitor across the snow-covered courtyard, their footsteps creating a soft trail behind them. The young soldiers followed silently, no longer swaggering or joking, but walking with reverence, as if escorting someone far greater than they had ever realized. Snow continued falling gently, each flake catching the pale winter sunlight as Christmas morning slowly brightened the base. When they reached the community hall, warm light spilled from its windows, and the muffled sound of voices inside created a soft hum of anticipation. The colonel paused at the entrance and turned to the old man. "They're all in there," he said quietly. "The ones who survived that night, men you carried, men you shielded from the cold, men who owe their Christmases, every single one since, to you." The janitor swallowed hard, emotion tightening his features. His white beard trembled slightly as he took a slow breath. "I never expected to see them again," he whispered. "I thought they would have forgotten. No one forgets the man who saves their life," the colonel replied firmly. He pushed the doors open. The warm glow inside spilled into the cold morning, washing over the janitor's faded red shirt and worn blue jeans. Inside, a gathering of older veterans, officers, and a few younger soldiers filled the hall. Christmas decorations hung from the ceiling, lights twinkling, wreaths and garlands adorning the walls. A small Christmas tree stood in the corner, simple but glowing softly. Conversations halted as the men inside looked toward the entrance. For a long moment, no one moved. The janitor stood silhouetted in the doorway, snowflakes clinging to his shoulders, breath fogging in the warm air. Then one of the older veterans, a man with silver hair and a scar on his cheek, rose slowly from his seat. His eyes widened in disbelief, then softened with emotion. Is that really him?" he whispered. Another veteran stood up, then a third, then more, all frozen in memories that flooded back like a tidal wave. The man with the scar stepped forward first. "You carried me," he said, voice breaking. "I was gone, I couldn't feel my legs, but you brought me back." The janitor's eyes shimmered. "You were just a boy," he murmured. "I wasn't going to leave you behind." More veterans stepped forward, each face touched with awe. "You kept the fire going when ours died. You gave me your last rations. You walked through that blizzard alone. You saved my brother." The janitor blinked rapidly, overwhelmed as these grown men, men with medals, rank, and decades of service, surrounded him with gratitude stronger than any praise he had ever imagined. Then the colonel called out, "Attention!" Every man in the room snapped to formation with perfect precision. Even the younger soldiers who had mocked him minutes earlier straightened their posture. The colonel stepped aside, leaving the old janitor at the center of the room. "Gentlemen," he said loudly, voice filled with pride, "the man standing before you is the reason we are alive today. The reason we celebrate Christmas with our families. The reason we walk, breathe, and stand here." He faced the janitor. "Sir, your war record is not forgotten. It is written in the lives of